All right, we'll go ahead and get started. And we're still waiting for Wes to join us, but hopefully he'll be able to get on soon and we can go through introductions and get everything else started for the conversation to begin. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon or morning for those of you who are on the West Coast for this roundtable discussion exploring how the recently passed federal COVID-19 relief legislation will affect food policy on the ground in our communities. We hope you and your families are staying healthy, both physically and mentally during these very challenging times. And we also want to thank you all for all the work you've been doing to support your communities. From the robust listserv conversations that we've been reading and other calls we've had over the past few weeks, we know that you all have been busy coordinating emergency food distribution and public communications needs, and also developing recommendations to identify food policy needs in your states and municipalities to mitigate some of the worst impacts of COVID-19. Amidst all of this, we've had 3 pieces of federal legislation that have passed in the last month, with the most robust one passed a little over a week ago. Today, we're going to explore exactly what is in this COVID-19 relief legislation and what we can expect the process might be for distributing resources to support local food systems. We're also going to discuss how food policy councils can engage in conversations and advocacy around future COVID-19 relief bills. My name is Rachel Santo, and I'm a Senior Research Program Coordinator with the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future and the Food Policy Networks Project. Co-facilitating with me today is Sarah Goldman, a Senior Research Program Coordinator for the Center's Food System Policy Program. Also on the call with us is Karen Bassarab, a Senior Program Officer, and Ann Palmer and Bob Martin, Program Directors at the Center. We are delighted to welcome Corey Malone-Smola from Feeding America and Wes King from the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition to share their insights with us this afternoon. Before we begin the discussion, I would like to briefly go over a few features of Zoom that we're using, this conferencing system we're using today. Today's discussion will be organized differently than a typical webinar. So in lieu of presentations, we'll have Corey and Wes provide a broad overview of what's going on at the federal level in terms of COVID-19 relief legislation and how it will impact anti-hunger programs in the case of Corey and small and mid-sized farmers in the case of Wes. Sarah and I will then ask some follow-up questions to Corey and Wes based on questions that you all submitted during registration. All of you will be muted throughout the conversation. If you have a question or comment at some point, please chat it in the chat box located on the floating toolbar at the bottom of your screen, or raise your hand to speak if you're on the phone. For those of you who are attending on the phone, you can hit *9 if you want to raise your hand, and *6 to unmute. We'll be reviewing questions and trying to address them as we go through the conversation. And we will be recording the discussion today and we'll share it with everyone that registered in the next few days. So as mentioned before, this roundtable is being hosted by the Center for a Livable Future, an interdisciplinary center located at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Our work focuses on the intersections of diet, the environment, public health, and food production. The Food Policy Networks Project is one of our projects with the goal to build the capacity of food system stakeholders to reform local, state, regional, and tribal food systems through effective public policy. We do that through training, sharing best practices, networking with other food policy groups and leaders, and developing and providing food policy resource materials. If you're not familiar with our project, I encourage you to check out our website, foodpolicynetworks.org, and to sign up for our listserv to hear about future webinars and other conversations. I'm now going to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to introduce our speakers.
Hi, so our first speaker is Corey Malone-Smola. Corey is a policy specialist for Feeding America. Corey provides policy and data analysis of federal nutrition programs like SNAP, TFAP, FDPR, and child nutrition programs. Prior to Feeding America, Corey was an Emerson Hunger Fellow at the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Our other speaker today is Wes King. Wes King has worked on sustainability and food policy issues for 10 years. As a senior policy specialist at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, also known as NSAC, he staffs NSAC's Marketing, Food Systems, and Rural Development Committee. Before joining NSAC in 2016, Wes spent the previous 6 years at the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, working on food access, farmers markets, and working land conservation policy, and leading efforts to create a more risk and scale-appropriate regulatory environment for farms and local food businesses. Prior to that, he worked for the Illinois Environmental Council. So Corey, can we hand it off to you to start by laying out what you see as the most essential takeaways from the recent COVID-19 legislation?
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you to everyone for having me on the call today. I wanted to start by just saying thank you for everything that you all have already done to serve people in need and the unprecedented crisis that we're seeing right now as a result of COVID-19. I know that there's a lot of change happening right now, and some of that is scary, but I'm hopeful that some of these changes that we're seeing on a federal level can help ensure that we can get healthy and nutritious and culturally appropriate food to people in need during this crisis. I would say the major top line messaging to take away from everything right now is that we really need to support SNAP. We need to do everything that we can to make sure that investments in SNAP are funded, and that specifically that maximum allotments are raised from $16 to $30 for the minimum allotment. Sorry, I misspoke earlier. And then make sure that maximum allotments per family, which varies by family size, is increased by 15%. The past few bills have addressed some changes in terms of flexibilities for nutrition programs, as well as getting rid of ABOD requirements for time limits for reporting work, which is a needed and essential change right now, but we need to do everything that we can to increase funding for SNAP. And as we head into the next bills, that's the most important focus, because SNAP is the nation's first line of defense against hunger. And when we invest in SNAP, that's our best way to address the rising need for access to food during this time.
Great, thanks, Corey.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell us how soon you'd like to see these changes happen and what changes you've already seen happen.
Great. So as I just referenced, as of April 1st, the change to SNAP that will now allow people with ABOD status, which is able-bodied adult without dependents, to access the SNAP program. There are no longer any time limits on reporting work. So if you have people in your community that have previously lost access to SNAP due to these regulations, please encourage them to reapply. Right now, it is extremely, extremely important to get that message across. And if you are looking for flyers as to what that would look like, I am happy to share some resources with you all as to some model language to share that. And we're also launching a public website soon through Feeding America specific to our advocacy actions to have some of those resources collected from our organization as well as partners. And I can share that along as well. In terms of moving forward, increasing funding for SNAP, like I said, is essential, but also increasing flexibilities for existing programs like WIC and TFAP, as well as FDIPR, the Food Distribution Program on Indian reservations, to ensure that proper social distancing measures are allowed to be practiced during this time, are essential to ensure that we're getting access to having people access food in a safe and healthy way. Specifically, there's a policy fix that people cannot access SNAP and FDIPR at the same time. And that dates to the creation of the FDIPR program and would have to require an act of Congress to change that. So USDA probably does not have the authority to make that fix with a simple waiver. So that is definitely a priority that we are advocating for going into the next few bills. And we're hearing from our partners at different Native serving organizations and tribal communities that would be an essential fix to address the extremely high need we're seeing in those communities at this time.
Great, that's a really important update. Thanks for sharing with us. To follow up, in regards to the USDA nationwide waivers, are there any unusual ones that you're seeing being requested by individual states?
I would say that I'm not quite sure how we can categorize unusual right now because everything seems to be in flux. And I will say that I do hope a silver lining out of all of this is that we're encouraging innovative approaches to within current existing federal nutrition programs. I am looking forward to see how pandemic EBT rolls out as a way to address the loss of school meals that children are seeing as a result of school closures. And I think depending on how that process goes, I would be interested to see how that could lay the groundwork for essential advancements in child nutrition programs going forward, such as expanding summer EBT pilots and having, while those programs are different, they could function in similar ways. And hopefully we're able to make progress in that to move beyond this crisis and expand access to meals for children in the future as well.
Great, that's really important work. Another question we have is if there's funding also made available to hunger fighting nonprofit groups through this newly passed legislation.
This is a great question, and we are, of course, monitoring this as a way to continue to connect our network of food banks with essential grants and funding during this time. A few programs that have come as a result of this legislation include some community development block granting that maybe you all are familiar with and have had access to before, but there is some increased funding for that program, as well as there are some small business loan programs that are going on, as well as the payment protection program. And there's also some funding available through FEMA. I know that there's been reports of trying to navigate which sources of funding that you can access without being duplicative and ensuring that you're abiding by all federal requirements. And as we continue to research that more, I can follow back up with you all. We're hoping to have a resource available for our network and beyond that will kind of walk through what those steps would look like.
Great, yeah, we look forward to seeing the resource when it's available. And the last question I have for you before turning it over to Wes and opening it up to questions from people on this webinar is how is the nation prepared to respond to increase in applications for SNAP benefits? And then specifically, how does this affect small retailers?
So I would say that if there's one thing you can take away from this is that SNAP is our first line of defense against hunger, and that it is essential that the SNAP program continually be supported and improved upon, because it is an important mechanism that allows our communities and economies to respond in a time of crisis. The SNAP program was built for ensuring that when there's an economic downturn, SNAP should increase and go to the people that need that. And in turn, that then helps local economies, helps the economy on a national level, and also ensures that people have access to nutritious foods. So I would say that we have to continually advocating for improvements to SNAP, such as raising those benefits levels, doing all that we can to prevent some harmful SNAP rules from going into effect that would reduce eligibility and therefore weaken the program that is designed to respond in a crisis just like this to ensure that people have access to meals, and also be innovative again and advocate for changing certain parts about the SNAP program that would be unique to this time, such as maybe you all are familiar with the SNAP restaurant and meals program, where certain populations in certain states are able to use SNAP benefits for restaurants. And as we're seeing a huge hit to that industry right now, I think as we can continue to think about approaches to responding to this crisis, expanding SNAP so that could be an option, as well as online purchasing for SNAP, and expanding that approach to ensure again that people have safer access to getting the food that they need.
Great, thank you so much. And I see a few questions already in the chat box. Now I'm going to hand it off to Wes King for his 15-minute overview.
All right. Hopefully it all works okay. I've been having some issues where I've had to turn off the video portion of video chats, just, because so many people are streaming things nowadays that sometimes the internet can't quite handle all of it. So if I start cutting in and out, please let me know and I can turn my video off. And that seems to have been in previous, so just let me know. That said, you know, part of the reason I'm happy to join everybody is to help kind of start get some information about what is included, not included, and what are the next steps when it comes to making sure that farmers, particularly under-researched farmers and local producers across this country get support and relief from legislation. I'm gonna go ahead and turn on video because turn off video. I'm getting warning. All right. Hopefully I don't get any more warnings or everything. So the CARES Act that was, gosh, it feels like it was yesterday, but that's the way time has moving now. That was recently passed and signed into law by Congress. This was as we are calling it in DC, the package, coronavirus 3 package, included some pretty big but small things in there for local and regional food systems and for farmers in general. The big thing being there was included a $9.5 billion pot of funding to provide direct assistance to farmers who have lost markets or incurred new costs as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak. When I said there are some big things and then really not a lot, or I sort of alluded to this, the bill only includes about one sentence about this $9.5 billion. It basically says $9.5 billion to assist farmers, including local and regional farmers who sell through farmers markets, farm to school, and direct to retail and direct to restaurants. That's about it. There were no guardrails or parameters provided to the USDA except here's $9.5 billion. Spend it in terms of direct aid to producers. So there's a lot of questions about how is this going to get rolled out? How is this assistance going to be made available to producers? And what are the stipulations? How much is going to go to what sector? How much is going to go to each sector? How much is going to go to what types of producers? Is there going to be set-asides, or is there going to be targeting to socially disadvantaged or farmers of color or beginning farmers? Lots of questions, not a lot of answers. And that is partially because the USDA was just given this basically a big chunk of money without a lot of direction from Congress to structure that payment program. So that's one of the things that we're at INSAC really laser focused on right now. In addition to the $9.5 billion, there was also a replenishment of the Commodity Credit Corporation. So there's billions of more dollars in that. That's the kind of obscure agency at the USDA that during the New Deal providing for commodity and the market facilitation payments. Don't need to talk about much. That's more traditional subsidies. Don't worry about that. It's that $9.5 billion that we're really concerned about and where we're focused on, because that's to me where we're going to be able to get some assistance to those that work in the local and regional food space. In addition to that, there was, as it was alluded to earlier by Corey, there was a lot of small business assistance disaster loans and programs set up in the CARES Act, the COVID-3 package. There was, in fact, $360 billion in forgivable loans to support small businesses, covering expenses like payroll, rent, mortgages, utilities, other similar obligations that aren't going to be able to be met as a result of the pandemic. While none of these are USDA programs, they're all part of the Small Business Administration program, they do potentially have impacts or uses for the farming and food systems community. So the two big pieces that were part of the CARES Act when it comes to the small business assistance is the Paycheck Protection Program, which is $349 billion of that 360. And that's providing, or the intention is to provide forgivable loans up to a certain point to help businesses retain workers or rehire workers. As of now, we are under the understanding that that includes farmers and farm businesses. They are eligible. However, there's a lot of questions that continue to swirl around this week, just like last week, as to what are the stipulations around whether or not farmers and farm businesses can access that funding. One thing I will note is nonprofits can. That's one of the things that we were happy to hear, because I know a lot of people in the local and regional food system space are concerned about organizations that operate farmers markets and food hubs and other nonprofit organizations. While I don't think the Paycheck Protection Program is going to be the solution for everything or for everyone, it does include nonprofits, so it's at least available to some. In addition to the Paycheck Protection Program, the CARES Act really expands and provides about $10 billion in loan capital for economic injury disaster loans. This is the one there's really a lot of questions and confusion about who is eligible and who is not. While Congress intended that, if you talk to the members of Congress who put together these provisions, they will say the intention is that farmers were going to be able to be eligible for the economic injury disaster loans. Right now, it's uncertain, and it seems like they aren't, due to some base level definitions that already exist in the law around small businesses. And it's one of those things that everybody's trying to figure out whether if it can be fixed administratively, or if the next coronavirus emergency response legislation is going to have to address it. So unfortunately, I think one of the most frustrating things going on with all of this assistance when it comes to farmers and food businesses in the CARES Act is nobody quite knows. There is a lot of uncertainty. We're dealing with the situation where, the federal government is trying to implement programs and policies in a matter of weeks that in another world they would have implemented over a matter of months to a half of a year. So there's so many questions that continue to swirl around, as well as, okay, well, you answered this question, but this then leads to this next question. So unfortunately, that's the broad situation we kind of find ourselves in. Lots of questions, not a lot of good answers about what is available and who's it's available to, and who or when it's going to be available if it's not available now.
Thanks, Wes. Those were some great overviews of all the questions we have. And so I guess one follow-up question we have is, as this is all happening and happening very rapidly, where should food policy councils and other people concerned about these issues be looking for information to follow this in real time? What sources should they be relying on and keeping up with on a regular basis?
Yeah, I can't help but, promote my own organization, National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, because we've been trying to stay up to date on as much of the information and resources as we can, and provide blog posts when necessary, looking in more in depth on what, what's going on. For instance, we published a blog post last week titled "Confusion Remains Over SBA Assistance for Farmers," where we're going into more detail on what the questions that remain and what we do know about the SBA programs. So I guess I would say, if you're not already on our email lists, we do a weekly email called the Weekly Roundup, where we summarize all of our blogs and provide links to those blogs. I think that's one place to pay attention to. And yeah, I guess that's what I would say would be my suggestion.
Great, thanks. And some follow-up questions that we have from participants before we launch into some of the other questions we have. Who are the most prominent leaders on the Hill who are advocating for clarification on eligibility and scope in future relief bills?
Oh, I'm assuming that's geared specifically towards the SBA provisions.
Yeah.
I'm not sure on the Senate who's leading that, but on the House side, Representative Delgado is the one that I know. Representative Delgado from upstate New York, Hudson Valley area, has been really leading the effort. And part of that's because they were one of the ones who really, their office worked really hard on getting some of that small business assistance language in there, and we're pushing for farmers to be included originally. That would be the one person I know for sure, one office I know for sure is working on this. Oh, with that said, this is definitely a big issue for a lot of people on the Hill. I think there is across all of agriculture, whether it's big commodities or sustainable ag and local food folks, people are really paying attention to that issue. I heard late last week that Sonny Perdue is even getting involved in that, like doing personal outreach to SBA administrators to say, hey, this needs to get fixed. So yeah, I guess there's my sort of answer.
That makes sense. And one question we have from our participant is, what does farm business mean to people handing out the money? Is it defined by your tax filings?
I guess it all, I use farm business interchangeably with farmer. I just, because I speak of, farmers are business operators. And I used the word business several times just because we were talking about small business. I don't use it as a distinction between the two terms.
Okay, that makes sense. Sorry, we have a stream of questions, so I'm just trying to keep track of them. Who is the best to contact with if you have specific questions about these stipulations? Somebody reported that it's been impossible to get a call back directly from grant administrator. So who should people be going to if they have further questions about these specifics?
That's a great question. I think those are the things that everybody's trying to figure out right now. The one thing I would say that, if you aren't able to get a response and you're having trouble, it's valuable to be letting your members of Congress know that. They're probably in the same boat as you as well, trying to get those answers, but letting them know so that they can continue to put pressure on SBA to get these answers out is valuable.
Great. And one follow-up question too is, how is NSAC working with farm and food system worker organizations? Can you speak to how the stimulus addresses any of those issues here?
Yeah, so my understanding is the stimulus did not address farm workers at all. And it's one of the things that we've been starting to coordinate with and network with those in the broader community that focus on that. We are not a farm worker organization. We don't want to pretend that we know what farm workers need. So what we've been trying to do is reach out to some of the farm worker organizations to make sure that if there are messages we can carry, we will carry those moving forward into the next package, the C4 package that Congress is starting to work on. I'm hopeful that something will be done to support farm workers in the next package. It really seems pretty essential, if you ask me, that we be focused on that as one of the things moving forward.
Yes, of course. I saw an article the other day that in the New York Times about how farm workers are being deemed essential, but still undocumented in this dichotomy that and paradox that the federal government is having to grapple with now for the first time, it seems like, in live time. So another question I have for both of you is, can you describe a little bit more about this C4 legislation and how fast you think it's going to move? I mean, the last 3 moved within a month. I mean, so is this something that if groups want to get involved with organizing or advocating for in any way, how could they do that? What's the timeline in your minds that you think this might be, recognizing that this is all happening? You know, that you're not the main decision makers on this, but what should people be expecting for this next round?
Yeah, another good question. Not great answers, but so we know Congress is supposed to be coming back around April 20th, towards the end of the month. I can't remember the exact date, into session. My guess is the first thing they're going to do is start working on passage of some C4 package. So that means now, between now and then is when that package is going to come together. It does not seem to be happening with the urgency and on the accelerated timeline that the previous stimulus bills did. But it still does appear to be, you know, things are starting to happen. We've been putting together our ideas, and we've started having initial conversations with folks on the Hill. I think that's where things are at. Things are at sort of the stage where organizations are starting to pitch ideas to members of Congress, and members of Congress are starting to check in with committees, committee staff, professional committee staff, and leadership to say, hey, what about this? And then also check back with people in their home districts, or just, so people are starting to vet ideas right now. So now is the time, if you've got ideas that you want to see happen, now's the time to get those out.
I completely confirm what Wes is saying as well. In the anti-hunger organizations, sign-on letters are circulating right now. Priorities are being put forth right now. All the legwork that will hopefully mean that we start seeing the priorities that we need to see for federal nutrition programs are happening right now. So now's the time, if you have a positive relationship with staffers in your local members of Congress's office, communicate those priorities now and do everything that you can right now, especially while it's still a time period in which those priorities can be incorporated. In middle to end of April is also when we're starting to see some movement in terms of the bill.
Thanks, both of you. That's very helpful. And I have received a few messages during this conversation with some groups that want to share calls to action, including one from Wes. And I'm sure, Corey, you might have one too. But I will share those out at the end of today or early tomorrow morning. But I'll try to get to it by the end of today because I recognize they're urgent sign-ons. So we'll send those out to everyone who's registered. And the most of them are organizational sign-ons. So something that your Food Policy Council could consider doing. And one question that I missed in relation to, we can backtrack a bit to food system worker organizations, is who are the farm worker and other food system worker organizations that you're uplifting, Wes, and also Corey, if there's any you want to point out.
I saw somebody put it up there, the HEAL Alliance. That would be a good one to go to. I'm not our point person on that issue, so beyond HEAL, I don't know who else we've been working with, but I can try to find that out in the next 30 seconds.
That's great.
I see another question as well. Someone asked, have any orgs, academia started watchdogging the $9.5 billion possibly going to big ag and biotech industry? And do states have oversight of how this $9.5 billion is distributed?
Farm Worker Justice was the other organization we've been doing some connection with. So the funding, the $9.5 billion, we are definitely concerned about making sure a good amount, a fair share of it goes to local and regional food producers and actual producers, not integrators, not agribusiness. We've been advocating for $1 billion. That is what our estimates are looking at. $1.01 billion is where we think the need is. that money is likely to flow through the Farm Service Agency. So states will not have any oversight or authority over that. I'm not too concerned right now about that funding going to agribusiness or integrators. But that $9.5 billion, a lot of that is meant to go to commodity producers, to livestock producers, to large scale specialty crop producers. It's not all for local foods. So there's definitely a sort of a knife fight behind the scenes around making sure each group gets their fair share. I guess that's what I have to say. Happy to answer follow-ups.
Thanks, Wes. One question for, I guess both of you, but probably more Wes, is that lots of people in both production and aggregation of food and produce are reporting losing access to cold chain and or greenhouses during this time. Are you hearing about any states, counties, or municipalities coming up with creative solutions to this, such as providing short-term incentives for restaurants to repurpose refrigeration space for cold holding for ag?
I had not heard about cold storage, this cold storage issue that's been mentioned. This is the first I've heard about that. With that being said, I haven't heard about any sort of state or local efforts to address that. One thing I can say that's sort of related to that, one of the things that I'm looking at for C4 is food safety. And I see cold storage as part of that. And is there a need to put resources in, one, I already knew there was a need. Farmers need help when it comes to financial assistance for food safety, equipment and practices. That existed prior to the outbreak, but I think there's a new layer caused by the pandemic outbreak in which there's an increased need for resources to be provided to farmers, food hubs, related supply chain organizations to retool their operations in a way that fits the current crisis. Some of that could mean cold storage, but also PPE, also all sorts of other working capital related to packaging, et cetera, et cetera.
Thanks, Wes. That makes sense. And this is a question that kind of ties in with both of you. We've also been hearing that while food banks are struggling to get food because of reduced donations from supermarkets, many small and mid-sized farmers have surplus product due to closings of universities and restaurants and other schools too. Do you have ideas for connecting the surplus that farmers are experiencing with emergency food distribution systems?
Yeah, so we've been hearing about this exact crisis. And one thing that I definitely encourage you all to do is, if you already have a relationship with the local food bank in your area, contact them and reach out and ask them to see what you can do and what role that you can play in connecting local farmers with a food bank in terms of seeing how we can mitigate that supply issue. Food banks are in desperate need of food sourcing and are having to find innovative ways, whether that's working with existing partnerships or finding new ones. Every food bank is different. Certain food banks have the capacity to have this happen. And the most important thing is to reach out to your local food bank. I'm working on this issue from a national office perspective, but one of the most important things that you can do right now is connect with your local food bank, because they know their capacity best and they know the kinds of products that they have room to store and to distribute. And if you need any help in building that or facilitating that relationship, you're welcome to reach out to me. You're also welcome to use our food bank locator on feedingamerica.org to find that contact information. And if you need any help to facilitate that, I'm happy to follow up.
Yeah, I'll just add, this is something we've been hearing more and more about, and something, in fact, just was reading stories this morning about the food waste that is occurring right now as a result of this imbalance in let's call it imbalance in the marketplace. One of the things we're very much looking at in terms of the coronavirus 4 package, the C4 package that is hopefully coming together. And one of the things we're trying to look at is, can there be funding provided to purchase this product from farmers who otherwise would have markets, and put it into the emergency food system. One of the things that, I don't think it actually has to follow this legislatively, but conceptually, the 2018 Farm Bill created a farm to food bank program that is part of TFAP. Well, there's a lot of, that would need a lot of flexibility built into it, and then would need funding. But there is at least a potential concept there that could be changed or adapted legislatively to fit this situation, and then provide funding to purchase that product. Because I think, part of the problem is that farmers who, some of this, they've got the excess produce, but they're not picking it. They're not packing it. They're leaving it into the fields because they don't have a market, and the actual cost in terms of labor to harvest and transport it it's not there. So there needs to be some sort of funding provided to help address that situation. And that's one of the things we're looking at.
I see a lot of great suggestions also coming in the chat box, but just to follow up to that question, are there any additional opportunities that you see to use the COVID relief policies to break down barriers between sustainable ag and the anti-hunger advocacy community?
I would say now's the time to think about what are some approaches that would solve some supply issues in the future in a non-crisis situation as well, and to consider how those would fit in the context of COVID-19 to try and advocate not just for temporary change, but to solidify some long-lasting partnerships to break down those sustainability barriers between the anti-hunger network and organizations that you allude to. So I would just encourage people to try and throw out as many ideas as possible right now. I think there's a lot of room to make improvements.
Yeah, and I wouldn't, necessarily say there's a barrier. We all work in separate issues. I think in my experience in working in this space, I've seen the collaboration between the anti-hunger nutrition world and the local food world growing over the years. I think, the trajectory is good. One of the things I guess I'll use this as an option to talk about another idea that we're looking at that I think has some cross-pollination or, is shared by the anti-hunger nutrition world is delivery for SNAP. Ideally, we would love to see SNAP online expanded beyond just big box retail establishments in a few states. But the little bit of the work I've been doing on that recently seems to suggest that that's probably not going to happen. So we've been talking with Senator Casey in Pennsylvania, and I know they're working with Representative Hayes in the House on legislation around an idea for the C4 package to provide resources to do SNAP delivery. You can actually, right now, someone can go online, order food online from somebody if they've got SNAP, and then use their SNAP card to swipe and pay for that at the point of delivery when it's delivered at a later date. It's something that I think a lot of organizations don't know, and something that there could be a lot more of that taking place if the funding was provided. So that's one of the things that we're looking at for the C4 package is, can there be funding provided to CBOs and the emergency food system to be partnering together on with grocery stores on SNAP delivery?
Great. Another question that we have for you is, How can we leverage this opportunity to advance long-term investment in local and regional food system infrastructure?
Well, ask that again.
Sure. How can we leverage this opportunity to advance long-term investment in local and regional food system infrastructure?
That's I think we've been so focused on how do we address the current crisis that I don't think we've really thought about that. Though I would say that, that food safety piece, if somehow this could be leveraged to increase investment in food safety and cold storage throughout the supply chain, I think that's the kind of investment that would have immediate impacts on the COVID pandemic situation, but also help build infrastructure long-term for this work. I would also I'd say that one of the things we're looking at as a short-term investment that would have longer-term payout would be in C4. Can we get more money for the already existing local and regional food systems grant programs, as well as some flexibility in those programs? So looking at, hey, can we get more funding for farmers market promotion program, for local food promotion program, along with a waiver for the cash match requirement? Those projects, if we got that, those projects wouldn't actually be beginning until several months from now. So they could be, and oftentimes those are multi-year projects. So the funding we're getting is in ways thinking about how do we rebuild and make a stronger food system in the wake of this.
Thanks, Wes. And one follow-up question to some of the discussions around connecting producers who have lost some of their markets with food banks is, can the agricultural clearance program play any role in this?
Well, agriculture clearance programs are essentially farm to food bank programs. I'm not aware of a federal agriculture clearance program besides the farm to food bank program that is a sub program of TFAP.
That makes sense. Thanks.
We've got one specific question about universal meals. This question is from a participant. Do we think we will see a larger push for universal meals during the school year nationwide? For example, New Hampshire has passed the waiver for it for the remainder of the year.
So I think that times have obviously changed a lot. We were expecting to be heavily involved in child nutrition reauthorization around this time. We've also been saying that for a couple of months now too. And that's obviously taken a back seat because of all of the COVID-19 pandemic bills that are going on right now. But I would say that I think going forward, solutions such as universal school meals and summer EBT for when schools are not in session in the summer or even on the weekends are going to be program changes that people will start thinking of in the context as well of what happens when we need to prepare again for a pandemic. We need to have programs in place that are effective when we're not in crisis, but as well as when we are. And once people start seeing the logistical barriers of making sure that you have all the data for the kids that are eligible for free and reduced school meals, and then being able to send EBT cards to those families, and seeing how logistically those are a lot of hurdles that would not necessarily exist if all children had access to school meals, and universal school meals was an essential part of our federal nutrition programs. So I can only hope that that is a conversation we carry forth, and moving forward, it's important to be able to draw upon what has been experienced during this time to then make future policy changes to ensure that a lot of these barriers are reduced, and we're making it as easy and as efficient as possible to feed kids.
Great, thanks. There are some other questions surrounding SNAP delivery. Is there any movement on getting SNAP online? Is there any chance that SNAP digital access pilot will be expanded to help, and maybe the creation of a secure application?
So I know that there is currently a bill right now. Wes, you might be actually able to say who it's from to expand online SNAP. So it's definitely something that's in the anti-hunger C4 priorities circulating right now in various sign-ons. So there's a big push for that currently.
Yeah. I don't know specifically the bill, though I feel like I think I saw something about that this morning. I know it's bubbling up everywhere. The questions, though, that are going to really, the big questions is does FNS, the Food and Nutrition Service at USDA, actually even have the technical capacity to do it? I think, look how long it took them to start these pilots to begin with. These pilots, the SNAP Online pilots, were authorized in the 2014 Farm Bill. They didn't start until, I think, 2018 was when the first one started. It's part of that, I think it has to do with prioritization. The USDA didn't prioritize them. But there's also there's a lot, my understanding is there's a lot of technical work on the back end to make it possible, particularly in terms of security issues. And as an agency, FNS is incredibly risk adverse. They have a history of being pounded from both the right and the left about security, fraud, et cetera, et cetera. They just tend to be a very risk-averse agency. So I'm skeptical that they'll actually be able to roll out any sort of meaningful expansion of SNAP Online beyond adding, another big box retailer in a couple states. But I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, I am looking at an email I just got now about SNAP Online, and it looks like California is pushing to expand its current SNAP Online rapidly right now in a response. So if anyone from California is aware of that or knows more than we currently do right now, feel free to let us know in the chat box as well.
Corey, another question for you. Are you advocating to ensure child nutrition programs are adequately compensated for their unexpected losses in revenue from the spring semester?
Yeah, so we're currently in active conversation right now with our national partners to figure that out exactly. And I know that it's definitely been a financial challenge for schools and other providers who have had to change their budgeting process and the different forecasts for their planning purposes drastically as a result of this. There are, you might be aware of a few waivers that have been put out that are extending data reporting requirements for states in terms of submitting their reimbursement as well. So there's going to be a data lag that will also play a role in that. But the intention of those waivers is to allow operators to be able to focus on feeding right now versus ensuring that they're meeting the deadlines for those reimbursements. But hopefully that that doesn't cause too much of a delay and lag as well. But I'm happy to, as those conversations with our partners develop more and as we hear more about what it would look like and what steps would be taken to ensure those financial difficulties are being addressed, I can report back.
Thanks, Corey. And we also have a few questions around the quality of food. How can we work to ensure that we're providing not only enough food to people, but also providing healthy and sustainable produce and whole grains and meats versus unhealthier foods like processed meat?
If this is in regards to SNAP, I think this is addressing the kind of issue of shelves going bare and not necessarily having access to all of the groceries that would normally be available. I know that this is an issue that we've seen, especially we've been working with the Ute Mountain Ute tribe in southwestern Colorado, and they, some of their tribal members have access to SNAP, but when they go to the store that is within their tribal travel limitations, there's no food left on the shelves right now. And so it's not only access to food, but access to healthy and nutritious foods and culturally appropriate foods. I know that this is an issue and I don't have a great answer for it, but I hear you, and I can loop back with my team and try and see what's going on. But it's definitely something that we don't want to see happen and breaks my heart.
Thanks, Corey. I think it was also in relation to USDA's purchases of foods through emergency food assistant programs and things like that, beyond just SNAP. But SNAP is clearly really important.
Well, I would say that most of our food banks report that the freshest and best produce that they often can get is through TFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, which had additional levels of funding in the last bill, and produce is available for them to purchase. There's also, you can go onto USDA's website and see the exact kinds of products that are available through TFAP, if that is useful as well. But I think as ensuring access to TFAP for our food banks is an essential way for healthy foods to be incorporated into our distributions.
Great. There's a lot of great conversation happening in the chat too. So I'd encourage you to check it out with some good questions that we haven't addressed yet, but they're being addressed in the chat. Wanted to go back and ask, are there any advocacy efforts forming around supporting businesses in the value chain, processing, distribution realm that we haven't touched on already?
You know, I would just say we sort of touched on it, but one of the things we've been broadly, you know, not just money for FMPP, LFPP, we've been broadly saying that, you know, providing more funding to AMS in general to do that work. One of the things we've heard from talking to AMS is that AMS, the Agriculture Marketing Service at USDA, they're the organization that runs a number of the local food grant programs. We've heard from them that they actually already have the authority to do a lot in terms of supporting the supply chain and in supporting new innovative models to get food to people. What they need is funding. So that's one of the conversations we're having as part of this. Hey, provide funding for FNPP, LFPP, or just more broadly, provide funding to AMS so they can use their existing cooperative agreement authority to go out to organizations and be like, hey, let's strengthen supply chain, let's support the supply chain.
Great, that's a helpful clarification, thanks.
And I'll also add in, we have several conversations happening around fresh food distribution and the capacity of food banks and pantries. Many don't have the capacity for fresh food or to store enough fresh food, or there was also a question about, let me find it, it's already gone. Somebody commented, let's see, finding a challenge to scale the capacity of these different resources when the types of foods that locally grown produce might be supporting are different than what pantries are used to. And so some have been commenting, and I'm reading this out loud more for people who are on the phone and can't necessarily read the chat, but some have been commenting that their farmers are storing it on their farms and then distributing it to the food pantries when it's ready to be used same day, and others are exploring mobile programs with refrigerated trucks to try to support that distribution.
Yeah, so I can speak to some of this. I know that things change every single day, and we have food banks in some areas where all of their partner food pantries are closed. They're all shut down. There are not enough volunteers, and they've moved to distributing food themselves through drive-thrus. And I know that one of some of what we're hearing is that means food comes in and goes out very quickly, and so they've had some more success with some fresh foods and being able to do that. That's not the case everywhere, obviously. Again, with what we were able to, like you said, get refrigerated trucks in some places and doing social distancing drop-offs that way, and have the products be refrigerated and stored. And also, again, I know that some food banks are working with restaurants and hotels and event spaces that have been had to shut their doors because they're not able to operate right now with social distancing guidelines, but they can still provide additional storage space or can function as a food pantry that has now been shut down and can become a new place to be able to distribute those foods. So it changes every day, and it changes from region to region, from city to city, from local community to local community. So definitely feel free, if you're hearing of certain struggles or successes as well within where you are, feel free to share those with me.
Great. And as we come up on time, just to think broadly about how food policy councils can connect to your work, we were wondering if you could share how food policy councils and similar groups can find out more information about the legislation as it's implemented and moves forward.
Yeah, you might be familiar with, we actually, as Feeding America, don't have all of our advocacy and legislative materials on a public website, but that is changing as of, I think, today or tomorrow. So I'm happy to share that with you all once that is officially launched. And the idea is for all the materials that we put up there to be applicable to not just food banks, but for food policy councils and partner organizations and other entities to be able to keep track of the different changes and needs for federal nutrition programs, and what you can do to advocate. Who are the target legislators that need to hear this message specifically, and other graphics and social media tools and other ways to engage your community, your food policy councils, and how to make the necessary funding and changes that we need to see in federal nutrition programs during this time. Also, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to be a bridger between you and any of the contacts that I have at local food banks, with the caveat of capacity is pretty stretched at this time, but everyone is working around the clock to ensure that what needs to get done gets done. So thank you for bearing with us in the meantime.
And for me, I would that aforementioned earlier in the hour sign-on letter that I think Sarah or Rachel are going to be sharing with the network. Please sign on and share it as wide and far as you can. We're trying to get hundreds, maybe it would be great if we had 1,000 organizations sign on to that, calling on the USDA to make sure that local producers are provided assistance in an equitable manner. And then moving ahead to C4, I guess I would just say back to, signing up to our weekly roundup and paying attention to our website. We haven't quite coalesced around any sort of specific ask yet for C4. We've got a lot of ideas that we're circulating with people on the Hill, but we haven't coalesced around a set yet that we're going to be trying to drive broad national advocacy around. But that does not mean we will not eventually. Everything is fluid and constantly changing.
Thanks, both of you. And one final question is, do you have any recommendations for food policy councils and others that are working more on local and even state policy advocacy? How can this tie in with their efforts at all of the different levels of policy advocacy?
So I would say that once we launch this public site, there will be a contact email address, policy@feedingamerica.org. And we will have more contact with anyone, as it's a public website than we've ever had before. And I absolutely encourage you all to send messages such as, do you have any materials or resources for us to use in this context? Because once we have that documented, then we can really make a case for allocating time and making sure that people have the resources that they need to make changes on the level of government that they're engaging with. So I definitely encourage that, but I would also underscore again, depending on your community, your local food bank may already be equipped with the tools and has been involved on a city and county level advocacy. The Feeding America National Office is focused on the federal level, but that's just due to our size. We wish we could expand beyond that, but we know that we count on our food banks to be able to engage on a local level more so as well. So if we don't know it, reach out to your food bank's advocacy and policy team as well, and they might be able to help and assist you all.
Great, thank you so much.
And I'll also mention, make a plug that there are several food policy councils working at local and state level that have started compiling policy recommendations for their various levels of policymakers. And so we can share a resource with you that we've been collating and collecting those policy recommendations to share out with other food policy councils in case you'd like to see what others are doing across the country, since we're all facing very similar situations, or at least somewhat similar situations. And with that, unless we have any other questions, we would like to thank Corey and Wes for taking the time to share these really valuable insights, and recognize that it's a very busy time for you as it is for many of us. So we appreciate you taking time to sit down and go through all these questions. And if we have follow-up questions, can they reach out to you by email? Is that, we can share your emails with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much.
Great, well, thank you both. And we'll send out those action alerts by the end of today. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.